in English. Okay. So before we start on our facilitation training, I just wanted to remind everybody also that we are in the midst of 7 weeks of training, a 7-week training series. We have 3 more, actually 2 more after today. So next week, same time, Thursday at 4:30, we'll have a session called Generating Proposals with Sociocracy. And that will really be a sociocracy focused training on how to take an idea and turn it into a proposal that the group can work toward making a decision about. And then on May 25th, we'll have sociocracy in the context of social justice. And that'll also be at the same time at 4:30, same link. You don't need to register. And both of those will be led by Shayla Massey, our sociocracy coach in the Food Policy Council. I think that's all I have. So I'll pass it over to you, Allison or Lauren.
All right.
Perfect.
Great. So thank you so much, Kristen. Hi, everyone. I'm a new face here. My name is Lauren Bard. I am a senior training manager at Health Resources in Action, which is a public health consultancy based in Boston, which is also where I live. And I come from a background in youth development and community resource coordination. I've worked in lots of different youth and community-based programs, have facilitated my fair share of meetings and trainings and whatnot. And so now I'm a full-time trainer, training mostly. All right. So that's just a little bit about me and what brings me here today. Introduce herself briefly.
Hi, everyone. Great to see some familiar faces. Again, my name is Allison. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an associate director at Health Resources in Action. Similar to Lauren, I come from a youth development background as well. I spent a lot of time training other folks about how to train, how to run programming, specifically for young people, but also just in the youth field, and do a lot of racial equity, health equity trainings. And then last week, of course, did the policy systems and environmental change workshop with y'all, and do a lot of work in that area as well.
All right, fantastic. So Allison is going to be sharing some slides for us, but as I like to start any meeting or training, I like to, sort of claim my seat and share a little bit about who I am and why I am the one up here, a little bit about my background so folks can kind of connect with what it might be, the experiences that we're bringing to the table. So how to lead effective meetings is the title of our little session together today, and our objectives today. We're going to talk about critical elements of a training or meeting, practice giving instructions to activities, and then review a sample agenda so y'all can identify strengths and
What
areas
happens?
of improvement. Are we good?
Yeah.
And our agenda, we're in the welcomes and introductions right now. We'll talk about critical elements of a training or meeting, practice agenda building, and then practice giving instructions, and we will close. And I think it's always really important to lead off with what we're doing, where we're trying to get to by sharing objectives, and then talking about the agenda, especially like if it's a long training and there's a break in there, folks need to know that. They need to know where the bathroom is. They need to know that they have permission to take care of themselves. So always like to start with group agreements. We don't have time for that today, but that's always and I'm sure that you have this embedded in your systems already. So I'm just going to state the obvious here and there, but we're going to start out by doing a little breakout room activity. And I would love for folks to reflect on, well, you can reintroduce yourselves to the folks in your group and then reflect on a time that you appreciated or benefited from either a training or a meeting. So why did you appreciate it? What made it so helpful or engaging? What did you learn from it? So thinking about like, wow, that was a really good meeting I went to. That really was a good use of my time. I know sometimes we go to meetings and we don't think that was a good use of our time, but sometimes we do. And that's what we want to highlight today. So I think we'll try to get those instruction slides. Actually, and I think I can drop those instructions in the chat as well. So folks will have them with them in the breakout.
Okay.
And There they are. Again, that's another best practice is when you're sending folks into breakout rooms, putting the instructions into the chat, saying them out loud a couple of times. You can even share the slide into the chat. There's an option when you share a screen that you can share the slides into the chat so folks can have them right in front of them. So any questions before we send you probably to 2 groups, right? 2 small groups to just talk about a good meeting and what was so good about it. And then I'd love to have a volunteer come back and share out what the top tips were from your favorite meeting.
Okay. They're opening now.
Okay. So you should get a pop-up. Go join a breakout and chat about great meeting you've been to.
Cool. The crystals are staying here.
Are you going to edit the recording?
I'm gonna pause it.
Welcome back, folks. Just give a couple more, well, 20 more seconds, and then everyone will be whisked back to the main room. All right. Folks should be popping back in, muting through cyberspace. Welcome back, everyone. All right, so I'd love to hear some share outs from those breakouts. Any highlights? Did anyone select a volunteer to share for their group? All right, Itza.
So our group, and I just want to invite any of my group mates to chime in if I'm missing anything. We all appreciated in our meetings that there seemed to be a sense of flow and space for feedback, like space to talk and be heard. And that sort of, even if the meeting was inefficient, there still felt like there was that trust, that accountability. You know, if someone said they were going to do something, they would do it. And that we knew it would happen. We also liked being able to give input in different ways, like at different meetings. So maybe in a forum format, or being able to tell stories, or kind of knowing what was going to happen, like with an agenda, and trusting that someone was going to follow up with that. Like if time was running out, that we knew that that agenda item would still be addressed, you know, kind of thing. Kind of, I know at least is my anxious heart, you know, so being able to know that was nice.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm seeing head nods from folks, so I feel like I might have covered what we wanted to do. So.
Beautiful. I like how you shared about different formats of participating. That's so important. Yeah, that folks have different access points. What about the other group? You can only hear us. You can't, your microphone doesn't work, huh?
Yeah, we have Daisy there here, but she couldn't talk. Yeah, there are something in her cell phone that we have to work with. Yeah, our group was talking about the themes that we feel comfortable and we feel interested, very engaged. And for us, we coincide that the topic of social justice, where we have to talk about community, but also talk about ourselves, is very interesting, very enriching, and is a topic where we could feel enough comfortable to talk, and very important to to talk all the time and feel engaging.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you. You made it really clear how important it is to feel included, to feel like your perspective, your lived experience is wanted, it matters, and that there's an opportunity to share that. Some meetings you go to and it's like someone's just talking at you, like it's a presentation. But I hear you all sharing the aspect of the community having equal participation, sharing their experiences. That's great. I also heard the knowing what's about to happen, like knowing the agenda, kind of what to expect. I love a meeting that, you know, sometimes you need a timekeeper because we need to like get through the agenda. We want to make sure we hit all the important points. And so we got to stay on time. Because as great as it is to feel like our stories are welcomed, sometimes, you know, we can continue that story maybe afterwards or on a personal basis and continue on the agenda. So all great points. Thank you, folks, for sharing out those points. So you've got experience in good meetings where you felt welcomed and heard. When I'm facilitating a Zoom meeting, I always like to point out in the beginning that there's multiple modes of participating on a Zoom meeting. So it's not just coming off mute and sharing in the space. You can also use the raise hand function because some folks want to be called on before they speak instead of speaking into the space because they don't want to talk at the same time. So, okay, the raise hand function is great. I like to point out the reactions button, like folks can give a thumbs up if they hear something that they like, use that reaction or, you know, the celebration. So we can use those reactions for showing participation and engagement in the meeting. And then there's always the chat. The chat is a great way to continue to participate and engage in the meeting. And like I responded to Daisy about, you know, thank you for participating in the chat because the microphone's not working and she's still able to participate and add thoughts in the chat as needed. So sometimes it's good for accessibility. Other times it's just a good way to stay included in the meeting without coming off mute. Sometimes there's too much noise in the background or whatever the case is, and we can't do that. So just wanted to name that. We move on to the next slide. We're going to talk a bit about elements of an effective meeting. So 3 key elements. There's so many, but planning the meeting, having the right materials, and then implementing it are the 3 elements we want to cover today. So what do you need to consider when planning a meeting or a training? And this is where you can either come off mute, you can drop it in the chat, you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. I'd love to hear folks share. What are the things you need to consider during the planning phase of a meeting? Who's going to be there? Yes, the audience. What do you want to know and be able to do after the meeting? Yes, so it's like the who, what, where, why, when of the meeting, right? So like the purpose of the meeting, what do you want to know and be able to do? Yeah. Other thoughts? ¿Quién va a estar ahí? Who's going to be there? ¿Qué quieres saber? What do you want? Oh, thank you. Sorry. I thought it was another person participating and I was, that is our interpreter. Thank you. Other thoughts? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Who's going to do what, and if there are specific roles in the group, who's what are their roles, what are their responsibilities?
Yes. What are the roles? Some meetings need different kinds of roles, others might not. Yeah, very good. When it comes to who will be there, it's not just how many people, but it's, you know, who are they? Where are they from? Is this a bunch of young people? Is it a mixed, you know, multi-generational group? Is it a multilingual group? These are really important. Yeah, age is important to know. Exactly. I like to run every meeting as if it's for teenagers. Try to have it more engaging with like icebreakers and activities. Like even adults don't want to be sitting for the whole time. So sometimes it's nice to have different things where they have to get up and move around and do different kinds of engagement, small groups, pair shares, that kind of thing. We'll get more into that in a bit. Other thoughts?
Also with audience, it's always important to know like experience, like what are you talking about? Is it a group of people who are brand new to that? Do they have more experience? Just thinking that, or is it a mixed levels?
Yeah, great. Roz.
Yeah, how to have a reasonable balance of process and action.
Very good. Balance. Yep. And this, Allison is sharing the slideshow and therefore is not able to type into the slides. I also have, this is just like a tip, like behind the scenes, behind the curtain for a Zoom meeting. I am able to write onto the slideshow and so it's showing up in real time. That's how that's working behind the curtain. Johanny.
También cuál es la idea de interés, o sea, de qué se va a hablar, de qué se va a tratar la reunión.
The topic, the purpose, right? We have to know who's there to speak. What's the reason for the meeting? Yes. Do we have the word purpose on? We do. Like, why are we here? I'm going to give it its own line. Is it in person or on Zoom? Yes. And is it hybrid? Because have you ever been in a meeting that was some people are in person and some are on Zoom and now you've got to manage all the features of in-person and Zoom? I have. It's really challenging. It can be done, but it takes a lot longer than either a strictly Zoom or strictly in-person meeting.
But Roz, you bring up a good point of just like the logistics overall, right? So I don't know if anyone has any other ideas about other logistics to keep in mind when they're planning a meeting.
Well, we can get into it. Folks did name some important stuff. The next slide talks about best practices around knowing the audience, which is the first thing. Oh, sorry, I skipped one. The POP model. So yes, the purpose, the outcomes, and the process. And you all touched on these as well. So what is the purpose of the meeting? Why are we here? What are we undertaking? So the purpose of the coalition, the purpose of the group that is there together, like what is the goal? And then the outcomes. What are the specific outcomes we want to accomplish as a result of this meeting? And someone mentioned that. What's the balance between process and action? So like the action being like the action steps, the outcomes of the meeting, and then process. How are we going to get there? What steps are we going to take to achieve those outcomes? And I know some folks want to go straight to action, and sometimes I'm one of those people, and I forget that the process is so important. And based on what you all shared about what have been good meetings for you, I think that for many folks here, process is also very important because it makes sure that folks are engaged, that their skills, their knowledge, their experience are being included. We can't just jump to action.
And for the model that you all use, these are all areas to get that consensus, right? Like you all are trying to agree on the outcomes, the steps and things like that. Which is a little bit different. In other places, it's not a consensus. It's more like whoever's facilitating or kind of bringing the training or meeting there, they're the ones mostly agreeing and then hoping that it lands well for everybody. All right.
Let's get to the next slide. A best practice is knowing your audience. So knowing how many participants are going to be there. If it's more than 25, it's going to take longer. I'll get the plan for that. That's both in person and virtually. Knowing about the reading level and the language skills or which languages folks are using. So interpretive services are available, closed captioning, ASL, different languages for different groups. And then if folks have other languages besides English that they're speaking, or if there's children, adolescents, adults, those are considerations. Preparing to accommodate all abilities. So this is not just like access to the space and making sure folks know, when you send out the meeting invitation, folks should know, like, how many steps does it take to get into the building? Is there an elevator? Is there parking? Those kinds of things are helpful accommodations for folks to know about. Is there childcare? Is there food available? We talked about learning styles already. And then being realistic with time. So I want to accomplish so much, and it's usually not possible to do everything we want to do. And it's more important to really dig into the things that that are most important to touch on. So not cramming things together. I always have like an extra activity in my back pocket just in case we go fast. I don't want to like be left with nothing, but creating space.
Yeah.
Folks can ask questions, start conversations.
When I plan my agendas, I do try to leave buffer time, right? Like, if it's an hour and a half agenda, can I leave 5 to 10 minutes? Because something will be different, right? Either we'll have like a really good conversation about something, or we'll add in something at kind of the last minute that's related. But like Lauren said, if we've actually gone through that time and then I have that, 10 minutes left, do I have another thing that maybe I was trying to save for like the next week that we can talk about now, or do we just end that early, right? And that's kind of a in the moment call.
Thoughts or questions? If at any point folks have thoughts or questions or comments, or it resonates, or you're like, wait, what about this? Feel free to jump in. Definitely opportunity for y'all to engage the material or ask questions. But if not, planning, so setting up in advance. So for virtual meetings like this one, having the slides in the agenda, planning with your co-trainer, having a tech host is ideal. Often when we run online trainings, we have a separate person whose only job is to set up breakout rooms and share slides and share videos that we want to show, make sure that they're sharing their audio, maybe playing music when folks are arriving and just making it a welcoming space. It's super helpful. And then obviously having good connectivity to the web is crucial.
It's out of your hands, but
yes, it is. And that's why sometimes you have to turn off the camera so that you get more of that bandwidth for the audio bit. But for in-person meetings, having those materials prepared in advance, whether it's flip chart paper and markers, still have to plan with your co-trainer, know who's going to do what, and prepare transitions. Setting up the space. Now, do we want boardroom style? Do we want circles, chairs in a circle? Do we want a U-shape, horseshoe? And if we're using a projector or other audiovisual equipment, it's important to check it in advance. Make sure we've got our adapter plugged so our laptops can be plugged in and we don't lose power mid-meeting. Roz, what do you want to add?
Well, I just wanted to mention, and this may go back a little bit, where the purpose of the meeting is important, but so are the values that we bring into the space. And I guess the more in alignment the values, the easier. It doesn't mean everybody has to think the same or believe the same, but there needs to be a certain shared value base in doing certain kinds of work.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. And Johanny agrees, is giving the thumbs up with the reaction. So appreciate that participation. And often when you're starting, especially if it's a group that's going to continue to meet over a period of time for a project, you're going to align on those values in the beginning. And I know for me, it's been super helpful, especially if there's like a little bit of friction or I have maybe a little mini conflict with someone and I'm like, I don't like the way they're doing this or that. I can just remember we're here for the same reason. We're aligned on the outcome we want to achieve. We share values, so I can let go of some of the personality stuff and focus on that shared value. So yeah, thanks for naming that, Roz. It's
also why like team building or having that kind of informal time together, especially if you're meeting over a long period of time, is so important. And as someone who like always just wanted to like skip to that action stuff, like it's really taken me to be like, oh, this matters, because if we run into any of those issues, like a disagreement about how to do something, we actually have a relationship now to use as a basis, as a grounding point, and we can have those discussions versus just not getting along or one of us leaving or something like that, or not being happy.
Yeah.
So it is important, like, especially like when you're kicking off like a new group, to really build in that time, which people don't always want to do, because it's like, well, it's fine. We don't really need to know each other. No, we do. We need to have those relationships.
And that's why we break bread. That's why we, if you were in person, you can offer food before the meeting, so folks can come early or grab coffee, whatever it is. Our team meetings that we have bi-weekly on our team, the team Allison and I are on at work, the meeting starts at 10:30, but the room is open at 10:15. These are Zoom meetings. And so folks come in early just to network, just to chat, play a game, do an icebreaker. And especially when you've been onboarded remotely and you haven't really spent much time with your coworkers face to face, it's just nice if you have the time to come early and say hi to the new folks that have joined and just hang out. So there's ways to do it in person, and there's ways to adapt to this virtual world that we often find ourselves in. So that's setting up in advance. Tip number 2, or the second piece, I suppose, second element, is designing effective materials. So when it comes to slideshows, if you're showing one, having, this is for flip chart paper in person or PowerPoints, there can't be too much text on each slide. No one wants to read a wall of text. I have done a training where I had a large quote I wanted us to go over. And so I used one of the animation features in PowerPoint to show the first 2 sentences. We read those and we thought about it. Then we popped up the second 2 sentences and then the final 2 sentences. So in 3 chunks, that way folks could like process it, because if you throw it all up there at once, it's just too much to take. So no more than 5 lines per slide, 5 words per line, etc. If we're writing on whiteboard, I'm notorious for being a sloppy in-person writer. So I could always ask someone else who's got neater handwriting or more patience to take over that job of writing on the whiteboard. We want to use graphics. This slide does not make a good example of using graphics, but we want to show and not tell, especially as that appeals to visual learners, and it can appeal to emotions or inspire action, some photographs that sort of tell the story. And then formatting. There's a lot of ways to make a slide unreadable, and that's by having odd font choice or size, by having blue background and then a different color blue letter or something like that. There's ways to make slides more accessible, and there's other considerations if you need to have a screen reader be able to read them. If you're working with folks that have limited vision, low vision or blind, they might be using a screen reader, and there's best practices for how to make that happen as well, but we don't have time to get into that.
We don't, but there are websites for to check if it's a good colors for color blindness. There's websites to put your colors in to check that. A lot of people have color blindness, and a lot of people don't realize that they do. So it's always a good thing as a facilitator or a person designing any materials to check for that as well.
Thoughts or questions, comments on materials or setting up? If not, we'll jump into some implementation tips or practices. So setting the container. This is introductions of the trainers or the facilitators and the participants. Whenever I go out and do a training, like at a conference or something, I really want everyone to say who they are, where they're coming from. That way the networking can begin. Networking is so important, and especially at some of the trainings we do in the youth worker community. Opportunities for folks to introduce themselves or do small group work is really helpful. That tech overview that I mentioned earlier, pointing out where the chat is, pointing out, where the closed caption button is, reactions, mute, unmute, camera on, camera off, all of that. If we're in person, it's like where the water is, where the bathroom is, that sort of thing. The topic is clear. We review the agenda, especially where the breaks are going to be, talk about our objectives. Folks love a preview, and knowing what's to come is super helpful. Having an icebreaker is always good. Doing another one after a break is always nice. Those energizers. And then setting our agreements. So working together, if possible, if there's time, working together to create agreements for our time together. But often we'll have sample agreements, or we'll set the stage with here agreements that we like to use, and then ask folks to add others or ask clarifying questions or lift up one. And I'll often revisit them especially if it's a long meeting or a long training, revisit them in the middle. How do we think we're doing on these agreements? Are we making space for folks who, don't often share and we want to hear their voice? Are we being respectful? Are we taking care of ourselves? That sort of thing. Revisiting. And if we're going to meet again tomorrow, I might review at the end of the day. And then again in the morning, the next day. So setting the container is really important.
Any thoughts or questions on any of these?
I'm giving that pause to make space for folks, because I know some folks will think and process and then come up with a question. And at any point you want to bring us back to a previous slide or something, this is for you, so feel free. Beyond that, we'll talk about the facilitator's best tools. So asking questions. Before presenting an idea, after presenting an idea, it's good to ask questions for the group. And usually open-ended questions are better than yes or no questions. So asking folks to think about or imagine or, wonder if, what would it be like if you had a magic wand? Those sort of prompts can be helpful to get folks generating creative ideas or engaging with content creatively. I love the magic wand question.
It brings us back to our imagination, which as adults we sometimes forget and or have suppressed in some ways. Kristen, do we need to switch interpreters?
Hi.
Hi, Catherine. We'll just
Yes,
pause
I
while
will.
we do that.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Okay.
Just a moment.
Esa María. Hola, Catherine. ¿Cómo estás?
Hola.
¿Cómo estás?
Yes. Okay, all set.
Thanks.
Wonderful. All right, let's go to the next slide. Second best tool, silence. So this can be hard. This is hard for me sometimes to let the silence sit because I might get a little uncomfortable. So I might remind myself to count to 10 or to take a drink of water or sip of coffee, just to give that pause so that folks can feel the opening to step into and share their thoughts.
This is an actual educational technique. It's called wait time. And so, like, as teachers, as facilitators, we are encouraged to slowly count to 10 because to you, it might seem like forever. But for someone who's really thinking through what you've asked, it's enough, it's enough processing time to get some thoughts together and share.
And our third best tools, processing tools. So doing a visioning activity, doing brainstorming, straw polling would be like asking, who thinks XYZ and have folks raise their hand, or stand up if, or, agree if you agree with the statement, stand on this side. If you disagree, stand on that side. And that can get folks moving and thinking. And small group work is great. I love coming up with different ways to break folks up into small groups that can be fun and creative. I worked at a camp, so I've got all those up my sleeve. Individual work, so like reflection, sometimes we'll have a moment for an activity and there'll be a reflection activity, and then there's like turn and talk to your neighbor or get into a small group and share out from your reflection. One we love to do on Zoom is the annotate feature. So if you're on a laptop and you scroll up to the view options at the top of your screen, you can get a drop-down menu that says annotate. It'll open up a toolbar, and then you can pick stamp, for example, and grab a stamp, and then you can mark. I love pair work, individual work, group work. I really love individual work, visioning. You can mark the screen. And so you can ask folks to vote or to, mark their opinion or whatever it is. You can even draw text and ask folks to write something on the screen and everyone can see it. It's a great way to engage virtual participation for folks. So feel free to try that if you're, want to practice. And the facilitator or whoever's a co-host has the ability to clear it before going on to the next slide. Otherwise it'll be there. Yeah, I see Roz on there, that annotate.
Yep, feel free to try it out.
We love annotates. We love it, love it, love it.
Love it.
It really is a great way to garner engagement.
There we go. Look at all these beautiful stamps.
Yep. Thank you, Itza, for putting stars. So yeah, this is a good one. Whatever you put on the slide, you can have folks agree or disagree. You can have them write, it could be the icebreaker, write your favorite TV show, whatever it is.
How do people find the stars or hearts?
So did you hit the annotate button and get the drop-down menu or like a menu to pop up on your screen?
Oh,
Yeah, if you go to the top of your screen, it says you're viewing Allison Shifley's screen, and then next to that view options, there's a little caret button pointing down. When you click that, a drop-down menu appears, and right about in the middle, annotate is an option. When you click on that, it pops up another menu, and that menu says mouse, text, draw, stamp. So then when you scroll over stamp, you get these stamp options, and you click one, you can stamp.
That coming up.
So that's a little favorite of mine. I'm gonna clear them all. Close
And
it.
remember, like Lauren and I have spent a lot of time exploring like the Zoom platform and getting comfortable and confident in it because we do facilitation as our jobs essentially, but all day, every day. So we spent a lot of time, and Zoom is constantly coming up with new things to make facilitation easier. Like those stamps did not exist 3 years ago when we all started using Zoom. Yeah.
And I mean, what we do when we do use this in a training, we'll do the annotate as an icebreaker. It'll be something we practice at the very beginning of the training so folks can try it. And then later on in the training, there'll be an activity where we use it and folks have already tried it. So they, are more able to just pop it open and start using it. But it's a cool tool, I think. So I'm assuming folks are familiar with these other facilitation tools or process tools, small group work, individual work, pair share, etc. If there's any thoughts or questions or best practices or things you've tried that aren't on this list that you want to lift up in this space, we welcome that. Thanks, John. All right, well, let's talk about why we use so many different process tools, because there are multiple types of intelligence. So this is called the Gardner's multiple intelligences. And there, what would they say, like if what's that analogy? If you try to get a fish to climb a tree or something, it's not gonna look smart.
I have no idea, but we can just say that Lauren created that one there.
I'm just saying everybody's a genius in their own way. And so if you try to get a fish to climb a tree, it's not going to look like a genius, but there's the visual spatial intelligence. So interpreting images, thinking in 3 dimensions. Can't judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree. Thank you, Itza. Thank you. Don't judge a facilitator by their ability to remember an analogy. You've got the linguistic verbal intelligence, the interpersonal, that person-to-person skill, understanding body language and all of that. Intrapersonal is like the ability to really know yourself, to be aware of how you feel, body awareness. Logistical, mathematical. Musical intelligence, that bodily kinesthetic intelligence, so athletes, dancers. And naturalistic intelligence, ability to communicate with nature and seeing patterns in nature. So there's so many different ways that people are very smart and valuable, and we want all different kinds of people to be involved in our coalitions and our meetings because we need all of these things. And so having different ways to engage, when I'll do a group with young people and I have like a do now question, like answer this question as soon as you come in, I'll say draw it. I'll say write it, like whatever you want to do to get your ideas out. It doesn't have to be my way. It can be any way you want to express it. Is great.
And this will come up all the time. Just today I was at another meeting and someone was talking to me and they were trying to like air draw a like symbol or draw. And I was like, nope, that is not going to work for me. I need to see it on a piece of paper, right? Because I know through my learning that I am very much a visual spatial learner, right? And I want slides or I want some sort of visual to help me process information, right? Especially when that visual is paired with someone talking about it and not just talking. So I used to struggle a lot in classes that were more lecture based and they're just talking at you and talking, you're supposed to take notes. And I struggled with that. Right. I struggled to get it. I struggled to remember it, struggled to write it down. Like it just wasn't my learning style. And then I don't know, like for some folks, putting things to music, right? Like I can still sing the United States, 50 states in alphabetical order because I learned that as a child, right? I can still sing, songs about like the US presidents and like all other things because that sticks in my memory and that sticks in people's memories a lot. Music is powerful. And so when I was working with high school students and they were obviously musically like inclined, like they loved listening to music, it's like, all right, well, you're studying for this test, put it in a song, right? Put it in a song and you will remember it better.
Yeah. Other thoughts or reflections on these multiple intelligences? Johanni's got the thumbs up. Appreciate that engagement with the reactions.
Or any experiences? Does this resonate for folks?
Lo que yo única que quería decir que gracias por enseñarnos la herramienta que no sabía yo de la barra de arriba. No me imaginaba que dónde era que se seleccionaban las notas, no sabía eso.
Awesome.
Learning new things.
Eso
Giuliani,
me va a ayudar mucho.
Oh, sorry.
Le voy a sacar mucho provecho a eso porque no me lo sabía.
Fantastic.
Gracias, sí.
Yeah.
Also, for curiosity, can you guys give us an example of each of the visuals of what will be like the naturalist? I'm curious of how that will be.
Yeah. So for each of these, like in a facilitation space, right? So visual spatial is having like slides or flip chart paper with things up there, pictures, graphics, a movie, right? Linguistic verbal is just far more about the conversation. It's a little bit more lecture style, but like debate, like as you know, sometimes in different things, like if you put it in like a debate setting of like, all right, this is our topic, like let's think through both sides, how do we want to present this to the public? Debate is a good version of linguistic verbal. Interperson, really between people, that means like your skill is talking to folks and listening to folks, right? And understanding the needs and kind of feelings of other folks. And interpersonal is yourself, right? Really having that interior thoughts. And for both of these, when you're thinking about creating agendas, it's important to include these and have different, like the individualized reflection time or the parent share. Logical mathematical is much more reasoning, right? Like it's not just mathematical problems. Yep.
Okay. Catherine, ¿ya estás ahí?
Oh.
Johanny, are you trying to share with the group or are you?
Yo estaba escuchándola ya en inglés, pero no, ya no estaba escuchando la traducción y se me había ido el globito también.
Oh, you're on the English channel and you want to switch to the Spanish channel? See, this is a new facilitation tool I didn't know about, is having multiple language channels. So I learned something new today as well. I don't know that she meant to be off mute.
Yeah, it is gone. Kristen, are you there? Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes.
Did that answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, strange. Let me try updating it and see. Okay. Yeah, we can hear you. It looks like the interpretation is turned on from my perspective.
Yeah.
And you're on the right channel, right?
Escucha, Caterina. Sí. Sí, te
Okay.
escucho.
Great.
Awesome.
Wonderful. All right, I think that's a good summary of the different kinds
Yeah.
of intelligences and how they show up in a meeting space or in a training space.
There were people who had some raised hands. Were they questions, comments? Yeah, Roz.
It's more a comment that sometimes I find multiple modalities helpful. Sometimes it depends on my mood, how I'm feeling. Might be generally visual, but sometimes I need a combination of things to have it something reinforced. So, and it also depends on if it's a very emotional thing, it might be more kinesthetic. So it really can vary depending on me and what's happening in the group.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that in. It's important because most of us do need multiple ones and they hit differently at different times. And it changes for people, right? Like I used to be much more logical, mathematical, and now I'm way more visual spatial. It doesn't mean the other one doesn't work for me. It's just realizing like which one helps me more, has that greater impact. And these are things that are really important as facilitators to consider, right? How can we bring some of these things into our agendas, into our meetings? You don't need to have everyone in every meeting, but still presenting and having that variety. And the other thing, and I think this is a little bit more for in-person, is like the bodily kinesthetic. A lot of people in that and with other things, they just need to move around, right? So as a facilitator or a teacher, like not making everyone sit down, right? Like someone could be pacing the side of the room and that's fine because that's what they need to do in order to really digest that information.
Yeah, I know when I was a student in school, if somebody wants to be doodling during a lecture, the teachers are not having it. But how many meetings have I been in as an adult in like a corporate or nonprofit setting where somebody's doodling and that's just how they stay focused and it's perfectly okay. So we're trying to like force children in school to do, we don't even hold ourselves to that. Because, you know, we know that, you know, it takes what it takes. You need to stand up, you need to walk around. I mean, we've got like all kinds of fidgets for in-person meetings. I know like in a classroom, the children will have like little things you can bounce on in your chair, all kinds of things to just keep them engaged in, you know, whatever they need to do. And it really depends like what's happening, like current events can affect which one of these I need to be engaged with, you know. Sometimes I want to role play. Most times, don't bring a role play near me in a meeting or a training. Johanny, what do you want to add?
Sí, también aparte, por ejemplo, de los niños, también los adultos. Por ejemplo, yo en lo personal, yo tengo, por ejemplo, con un problema con mi artritis en la parte lumbar, la parte de abajo de mi columna. Yo no puedo estar más de 1 hora sentada, yo me tengo que parar. Porque, o sea, siento más dolor, me siento más incómoda, pero si ya yo me paro, me muevo, duro un rato y vuelvo y me siento, o sea, no puedo estar en un solo lugar por mucho tiempo, ni mucho parada, ni mucho sentada. También, o sea, hay condiciones que muchas personas tienen, por ejemplo, también las piernas, o sea, la circulación, necesitan caminar porque no necesitan que su sangre circule, porque se acumulan en sus piernas, se le hincha o tienen vena varicosa o simplemente necesitan moverse. O sea, por muchos problemas físicos, la persona necesita tener movimiento.
Absolutely. Yes. My understanding of how this interpretation thing works is that folks can hear a translation or no?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely, Johanny. And this is why, like, when I do in-person trainings, I also invite people to move around, right? Like, move around, take a break when you need to, like, and because that's different. If most people, like, their only time in trainings, like their only experience is when they were in school, and it was very much sit down, feet flat on the floor, face forward, like all these things. It's very different to be invited to like be who you are in a space, right?
Yeah. So on that note, get the stretch.
Yeah, stretch, do what you need to do. I got fidget things on my desk. I've got paper here to doodle, like, and I'm the facilitator, right? But I still need that because that's how I process.
And Johanna reminded me to use my standing desk, stand up. So I appreciate that. I also have back pain and arm pain and all that. So yes, this it's really important to remember this and to keep it in mind. Not only for folks to be able to get up and move around and get the blood flowing, but I did a session at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and it involved people standing and moving around for most of the time. And so I put chairs in various locations because not everybody can stand up for an extended period of time, and they want that chair there to alleviate, whatever might be going on. So it is 5:34 and we're having so much fun that we're just digging into topics, but let's get on to the next slide, which kind of talks about different formats for meetings, in person versus online versus hybrid. So in person, obviously the location matters, the accessibility matters. This is where we think about things like parking and accessibility. If there's an elevator or stairs, we think about things like, do we want to ask people not to use perfume because some folks might have a sensitivity to that? And when we're in person, we got to consider that. Is it public transportation accessible? And then, how our visuals look, our slides, our flip charts, our handouts. You actually can, provide handouts to folks in person. And then facilitators can move between groups if you got breakouts. That's one thing when you're on Zoom, you have to go into the Zoom room, come back out, and it kind of interrupts the flow. Whereas in person, you can just kind of go and they see you nearby, you're listening, and they can call you in if they need to. Love in person though, love in person. Because you can really co-regulate. You can feel the vibes of folks, and folks are more likely to participate and share because it's just easier. Online, things take a little bit more time. The breakout room stuff, coming and going. Folks need an orientation to the platform sometimes. We never assume, even though many folks are very familiar with Zoom, we never assume. There's new tools being popped up on Zoom all the time. So we do a little orientation on Zoom and then use tech. So the annotate feature, there's a whiteboard feature as well, if we don't have time to get into, but that can be fun for stuff as well. Screen sharing, video sharing, sound sharing, all of that. Now, if you attempt a hybrid meeting, which takes even longer because you have the in-person facilitation and groups happening, and then you've got the online facilitation. So you really need a facilitator who's also on Zoom, potentially at home, somewhere else facilitating, and then maybe somebody in the room just kind of toggling between in-person and online and making sure, okay, everyone online's back or whatever the case is. So there's more time to prep. Now you're prepping in-person and online materials. You really need good, reliable tech, microphones, speakers, all of that. Not ideal, but when you have to do it, it's great that it's possible. Of course, in every space, body language matters, tone of voice and volume, the tech setup, the visuals, and then inviting all different kinds of engagement.
I'll also note for hybrid, it's not something that we always recommend, but know that it might be what you need to do in order to engage the most people. And it can be successful. So I was just on a panel a few weeks ago where I was in person. I was the panelist in person, and then there were 2 online, right? And so thinking about how you're setting up the space in order to incorporate that, and then again, having audience members in person and online. But these things needed to matter, right? Having that in-person and online facilitator, really working out all of the tech issues ahead of time. So you don't want to have to wait, right? You don't have to wait for we can't hear and things like that. And then figuring out where you're positioning people, right? So the one awkward thing about it was that I was up front in person and I couldn't see my panelists because they're on the screens behind me. So it was a little bit awkward. Right? When it was their turn to talk, I'm looking up like this, right? But otherwise they thought through a lot.
So just in summary, we want to create a welcoming environment for all these spaces, obviously. I sometimes running a Zoom meeting, another method of engagement is just to call on people, just to call on them and let them know you can pass, but just calling on folks or asking them to read the slide. And for the most part, folks are willing to come off mute and participate in that way. Get used to it. And then we generally try to use, at least one breakout room per hour. So if it's a multiple hours meeting, we try to at least have one breakout room or breakout activity per hour. We want to give folks breaks to look away from the screen, even if it's 5 minutes to go take a walk. And then using energizers and icebreakers are key.
What are people's questions or thoughts about any of this so far? Maybe our next slide will help prompt some. So what we want to do together is really brainstorm some of the challenges that you've experienced, whether or not you were leading a meeting, or maybe you were just a participant in a meeting or training. But what are some of the challenges you've experienced, or what might you be worried about experiencing if you're going to lead something? Because we want to spend some time here to really brainstorm and see if we can come up with some solutions or suggestions for you all. Roz, were you raising your hand? Yeah, awesome.
I would just love to hear some thoughts, some ideas about when you're in a group in some kind of tension or either mild or moderate conflict develops. How do you decide when it's best to address that in the moment versus thinking about what may be best for the group as a whole? I mean, do you just stop and ask the group, or sometimes that can be really awkward. Sometimes I might feel that the group isn't really ready to deal with any real conflict, but to ignore it doesn't feel right either. So just any thoughts around that kind of issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So depending on the level of conflict, I would say if it's more like mild or moderate, I would state I'm feeling tension in this room about this. And sometimes it's a question of do we want to dive into this right now, or do we want to hold this topic and come back to it in our next meeting to really dive into it and see if we can continue with the agenda as it is. If it's a major conflict, like people are yelling or something, which is very rare, right? I've been a facilitator for a long time, and that's a little bit more rare. Kind of have to deal with it in the moment. But that could also be if temperatures are heated, right? Things like that, or tempers are heated. Then we might need a break, right? We might need a cooling off period. We might need to engage a different processing tool, right? If we are doing a group discussion, maybe we need to do some individual reflection, let people think about their thoughts, write them down, and then come back together. Lauren, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just add that, I like what Allison said about, naming it and not, if I'm uncomfortable, I'm sure other folks are uncomfortable, and kind of naming it and bringing it back to the group. But if harm is being done, if someone is saying something that's racist, sexist, homophobic, ableist, then that harm needs to be stopped. We can't just try to push through. Going to break is, we're going to take 5, and then it's possible for the facilitator to go check in with whatever principal folks are engaging in that behavior, to check in on intentions. I mean, it's not out of the question that somebody could come out, speaking in general, not about your specific coalition or meetings, but we do a lot of racial equity trainings, and it has happened that someone has come with an agenda and wants to say harmful things, and that needs to be stopped. It cannot be allowed to continue. So that's the only, when you're talking about calling in versus calling out, yeah, we generally want to call folks in and assume best intentions. But if harm is being done, it has to be called out. Thank you, Itza.
Could I do a quick follow-up?
Of course.
So do you guys provide training for folks who can get comfortable enough to do that? Because it sounds easy and sometimes it can be easy, but it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. So do you have training that you offer around that, or what do you recommend for people?
Yeah, we offer like some conflict management or conflict resolution trainings, which might be helpful in this situation and doing more facilitation. Sometimes it's experience, right? So a lot of the times, whether you are actually facilitating or leading the meeting, or rather you're just a participant, seeing what happens and what works in the moment. But we can connect with like Kristen to see if there's other kind of conflict resolution or management trainings to offer.
Yeah, especially if you have different cultures involved.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We offer group facilitation trainings as well. And I would say that one of the most important things is how you set the container and set the group norms and group expectations. Really setting all of that up, taking the time to set all that stuff up in advance, because ideally then the group created the norms and they're going to hold each other accountable to the norms, and not, you know, put it all on the facilitator. But it practice, it really is practice that makes the big difference.
We had hoped to get a little bit of practice in tonight, but maybe we'll connect with Kristen about a round two for facilitation, for straight up practicing some of these situations. Other challenges or things that people want to bring into this space? Any questions about facilitation at all? I think one other tip I would add about facilitation is being flexible in the moment. So Lauren and I had an agenda for tonight that we were hoping to get through, and we didn't get through all of it, right? And so we're in the moment being like, should we do this? Should we do that? Because we want to take the lead from you all, right? If you have questions or things that are really resonated, then we want to spend time on that as the agenda. And then, you know, sometimes that means tabling things for a later time, or just not, like, you know, you're not going to get to something and kind of asking like, can we skip this part? Or maybe some part like we can cover in an email versus a meeting overall. And it's important to stay with the discussion that you're having. So there's a lot of behind the scenes adjustments that happen. And, you know, this is an hour and a half. But if it's a longer meeting or training, really thinking about, okay, well, you know, maybe we didn't have a break scheduled until like hour 2, but, you know, you're really needing it now, or a nice like energizer or stretch just to get the energy back into the room. Raz, yeah, go ahead.
If nobody else has a question, I have kind of a weird question.
Okay.
So if you want to do a group, but you don't want to do it exactly as it's always been done before, with all the kinds of things that you guys are talking about that are so important in many ways, so many of us have learned before, but that you want to work on building relationships differently.
Yep.
Where maybe you don't have as much clarity about everything. The agenda is not as clear. Do you have any thoughts about facilitating something like that that's just a little bit more open in a different kind of way?
So I think even if you don't have a clear agenda or you want to do something differently, that everyone's going in with the same purpose, right? So if you want to do more kind of team building or relationship building, stating that up front, being very transparent. I want to go in, I want to like have this relationship building time with you all. And I just did this last night, right? I went in, I did not have an agenda. I had a group of people coming together, and together we figured out what we were going to talk about, right? And kind of how we were going to do that. Now, I had some ideas in my back pocket, but it's also a time that, like, you know, if we're all here together in this small group, we can lead things. We can figure it out in the moment of like, if people are agreed on the purpose, then things usually come together pretty well, right? So if you're here for team building or relationship building, awesome, right? I might have some ideas of like questions or like things that I want to share about myself for, you know, for other people to know, and it'll happen. It might be a little rocky to start, but it will happen.
And if you've got 6 or 7 people who mostly want something different or unique,
That's where you have to find the commonality, right? So, you know, relationship building usually is a commonality, whether people are like in this group for different reasons. Usually that's one of those common things. I'm trying to think of other, you know, I, for example, worked on a program where we had to spend time coming up with what we all wanted for that program, and they were all different things. So then we had to spend time figuring out what are the things in common that we wanted for it, and where was their overlap, right? So if I'm over there being like, no, relationship building is the most important thing for this program, and someone over here is saying, no, the, you know, activities that we offer and that we must have these outcomes, well, there's a way to figure out how to bridge those a little bit, right? And so it's, and I mean, this goes back to what you were saying before with the values and spending time figuring out what those values are.
thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Lauren, do you have anything you want to add on that?
Well, I gave some great suggestions. I do like the idea of like brainstorming, you know, what are the possibilities for this meeting? But meanwhile, I've got 3 ideas in the back of my head. You know what I mean? So yeah. I've done this in a training where I want to send folks off to like brainstorm different aspects of, you know, youth programming. And I had what I thought were the most important aspects. But when I asked the group and we started to categorize things, okay, these 3 ideas fit here, those fit there, they came up with stuff that I didn't think of. And that made it so much more relevant to the folks that were in the room.
Catherine, were you trying to say something? Okay. Johanny.
Algo que yo iba a decir, por ejemplo, en cuanto a la comunicación, o sea, en cuanto al lenguaje, en cuanto que nos expresamos al hablar o hablar una discusión o algo, cómo nos damos cuenta de que, o sea, de que la manera del lenguaje de que nosotros nos estamos expresando, somos escuchados o es claro lo que estamos diciendo con diferentes clases de personas. O sea, yo lo digo en el aspecto de a veces que como son personas diferentes, de diferente cultura, a veces, por ejemplo, tú dices una palabra o te expresas de una forma, pero esa persona no lo captó así, lo captó de otra manera que no es cómoda o no se siente segura de lo que dijeron, o por ejemplo, no estoy cómoda con eso porque no es lo que yo entendí, aunque quizás esa persona está bien lo que dijo. O sea, puede ser que sea la persona facilitadora que lo diga, pero para esa persona está bien, pero para otra persona no, porque no lo está tomando como lo pensó. Por ejemplo, yo pueden decir algo que, por ejemplo, a mí me puede molestar, pero es porque yo no entiendo ese lenguaje. Es porque no entiendo el lenguaje de cómo lo están diciendo, que para mí es diferente. Entonces, ¿cómo se maneja eso?
Yeah. I think it goes back to what Roz was saying about values and remembering that we're here for the right reasons. We're here for the same values or same reasons. And some of the group agreements that we usually start at the beginning of a meeting or a training or a session, assuming best intentions, but being aware of impact. So assuming that people aren't trying to hurt one another's feelings, but acknowledging that sometimes that happens and we have to deal with the impact. And then there's another group agreement that we sometimes bring into a space called oops and ouch. And so if someone says something that they just put it out there and then it lands with somebody in a way that, wow, that wasn't okay. That made me not feel okay at all. I can say, oops. I mean, I can say, ouch, into the space, ouch. And the person who just finished speaking is gonna, oh, someone said, ouch. Let me think about what I just said. Maybe I wanna rephrase it. Maybe I wanna ask a question about, like, I don't understand what I said. What was wrong with that? Or if I catch myself and like, you're right, you know what? Oops, I didn't mean it that way at all. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase myself. So it's just like a shorthand to allow space for, we want folks to share and be open and be vulnerable. And sometimes folks don't talk in a meeting because they're afraid to say the wrong thing or offend somebody. And then we have just silence, you know? So the oops, ouch thing can be a helpful way to kind of meet in the middle, but assuming best intentions and taking care of impact. And when you're working across languages or even with the same language, like I know in Spanish, there's some words that are okay to say in one country and not really okay to say in another. And we meet in the middle, understanding that that's the case. And we need to be considerate of that.
It's really important and really powerful when, someone says something that maybe isn't landing right for you, to say like, this is what I heard. This made me feel this way. To give them that chance to be like, that's not what I meant, or maybe it is what they meant, in which case you need to go to the conflict resolution part. But most of the time, that's not what they meant, right? But they said a word that like you interpreted differently, or you had experiences that really came to mind that maybe were triggering.
Y eso sucede en algunas reuniones, ha sucedido eso, o sea, y se queda como esa espina, por ejemplo, como dicen, que la persona no se siente cómoda porque se crea como un conflicto de desacuerdo, porque no se tiene una idea clara por la forma en que se expresan las palabras o el contenido.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with experience leading meetings and facilitating, you'll pick up when there's some tension that maybe isn't named, right? Like if someone in your meeting, you can tell like maybe they took something one way, maybe they've disengaged a little bit. And that's a chance to check in on them too, to see like what happened, how did something land or not, whether or not you said it, maybe someone else said it. But you're checking in on them to see what's going on. Okay. Other thoughts, questions, or comments? Okay. Well, we hope that this was helpful, right? It was a little bit of mix of hopefully some new things in Zoom, some things to think about when you're designing your circle agendas or other content. We really encourage you to incorporate different processing tools and those different intelligences. And again, it doesn't need to be all of those in each meeting, but varying it up a little bit. Can you get an individual reflection in there? Can you get some visuals in there another time? Just to help everyone out, right? Because you're facilitating a meeting, you want to get some points across, and you want to make sure people leave with those points. That's what we have for you for now. If you have any questions or things that come up, I'm sure if you reach out to Kristen can forward it over to us, and we can offer some suggestions. But thank you all so much. This is our last one, but I know you have some more Thursday trainings happening and coming up with the other facilitators.
Thanks for spending time with us. Thanks for your comments. It was great to meet you all. I really enjoyed our time together.
Sí, gracias a ustedes por su gran trabajo. Gracias por apoyarnos.
Gracias.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.